As the sun sets, casting long shadows over the quiet road, John Harris, a veteran of the Second World War, drives home after a long day of work. The weight of years, of battles fought, still lingers in his heart. But as he cruises down the empty road, something unexpected happens. A figure, a woman, appears out of nowhere, standing in his path. With a sharp turn of the wheel, he narrowly avoids her, the headlights flashing on her face. John freezes. The woman, she looks just like his mother. The one who disappeared over 30 years ago. Shock floods his mind. How could this be? Is it a trick of the light, or is something deeper at play? His heart races and 1,000 questions flood his thoughts, but one thing is clear: he can't just drive away. He has to help her. Welcome to the channel. If you believe these stories should never be forgotten, join us. Subscribe now and turn on the notifications to help keep every memory and every story alive. Without further delay, let's get straight to the point. As John drives along the quiet road with the mysterious woman by his side, his thoughts drift back to a time long ago, a time filled with pain and loss. The engine hums softly, but in his mind, it's as if the world is rushing past in a blur of memories. He recalls his childhood and the way the war had torn apart everything he knew. His family, once whole and full of laughter, was now a collection of shattered moments and broken promises. He remembers his mother's warm embrace, the gentle way she used to comfort him during storms, when the world outside seemed too big and too harsh. But that was before the war took her from him. She had disappeared without a trace, and with her went a piece of his heart. The search for answers, for some hint of where she had gone, had never led anywhere. Each day felt like a journey into the unknown, a path he had to walk alone. Growing up without her had been harder than John could ever explain. There were nights, many nights, when he lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions. Why had she gone? Why couldn't he remember the last time he saw her? Where had she gone? The answers, though, never came. Instead, there was just the silence, the emptiness that never seemed to go away. The woman sitting next to him now, her face hauntingly familiar, brought with her more than just a strange sense of recognition. Her words, soft but filled with a weight John couldn't ignore, shook him to his core. "Don't keep me trapped again," she had whispered earlier. Those words, simple but laced with sorrow, echoed through him like a bell tolling in the distance. It was as if they had reached deep into his soul, stirring up the memories he had long tried to bury. John's mind flashed back to the horrors of war, to the friends he had lost, to the times when he had come close to losing himself. It was as if he were still there, on those battlefields, surrounded by the smoke and chaos, hearing the cries of comrades and the sounds of the world breaking apart. His memories were full of the faces of those who had fought beside him, faces that were now just shadows in his mind. The scars of war were not just on his body, but on his spirit. The things he had seen, the choices he had made, and the weight of all those lost lives had never truly left him. In those moments of battle, John had often wondered if he, too, would become a shadow, lost to time and forgotten by the world. There were times when he thought he might never come home, when it felt like the war had consumed him completely, but somehow he had made it through. He had survived, only to return to a world that had changed in ways he could never have imagined. And now, here he was with this woman, this figure who seemed to carry a part of his past he had never fully understood. The car rumbled down the road, and John's hands tightened on the wheel. His mind was a storm of thoughts, of memories he had tried, so hard to bury. But now they were coming back, flooding him all at once. The pain, the loss, the loneliness, everything he had endured felt alive again, as if the past had never truly let go. As they drove in silence, John couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of twisted fate, bringing him back to a moment he thought he had left behind forever. Was this woman some kind of sign? A reminder of what had been lost, or perhaps of what could still be found? The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, much like the years that had passed since he last saw his mother. And yet, for the first time in a long time, John felt a strange flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was about to find the answers he had been searching for all his life. John's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled into the hospital parking lot, the tires of his car crunching on the gravel. The night felt colder now, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The woman beside him, the one whose face was hauntingly familiar, had fallen silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He didn't know what to expect, but something told him that this would be the moment that changed everything. The hospital's bright lights flickered overhead as John helped her out of the car, his mind racing with thoughts of the unimaginable. Could it really be her? Could this woman who had stepped into his life like a shadow from the past be his mother? The one he had mourned for so many years. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the past was pulling him back, urging him to face what he had feared all his life. Inside, the sterile smell of the hospital hit him like a wave. The noise of distant conversations, the beeping of machines, and the shuffling of nurses filled the air. John led her through the halls, his thoughts swirling with doubt and disbelief. His heart told him it was her, but his mind screamed that it couldn't be. He had searched for so long, had come to terms with the idea that his mother was gone, forever. And yet, here she was, standing beside him. They reached the emergency room, and John's voice cracked as he spoke to the nurse at the desk, explaining the situation. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern before leading them down a long corridor to a small room. The woman sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her eyes downcast, her expression unreadable. The nurse left them alone, telling John that the doctor would be there shortly to run a few tests. John paced, nervously, unable to shake the feeling that he was on the verge of some terrible revelation. The longer he waited, the more the walls of the room seemed to close in around him. Finally, the door opened, and a doctor entered with a nurse by his side. The doctor was kind but professional, his expression unreadable as he examined the woman sitting on the bed. After a few moments of quiet conversation with the nurse, he turned to John. "I'm afraid you won't like what I'm about to tell you," the doctor said gently, "but the woman you brought in, we've seen her here before." John's chest tightened. He felt a wave of nausea rise within him. "What do you mean? Who is she?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The doctor looked at the nurse, who nodded solemnly. "She's been a patient here for over 30 years, the doctor continued. "Her name is Juana. She's been here in our psychiatric facility for much of that time." John froze. Juana. His mother. He couldn't breathe. A wave of disbelief washed over him. This couldn't be real. This woman, the one he had spent his whole life mourning, had been here all along, hidden away in a place he never even knew existed. The nurse stepped forward, confirming the doctor's words. "She's been in and out of care over the years, a victim of abandonment and neglect. It's a tragic story. She had been severely abused and lost all connection to the outside world." John could hardly comprehend what he was hearing. His mind struggled to process the reality of it all. For 30 years, he had thought his mother was gone, vanished without a trace. And now, here she was, a stranger in her own right, trapped in a nightmare that had torn her life apart. As the weight of the revelation settled over him, a flood of emotions hit John all at once. Anger, grief, guilt. He had spent so many years wondering why she had left, why she had disappeared. And now, to learn that she had been suffering all this time, alone and forgotten, he didn't know what to feel. The nurse continued, her voice soft with sympathy. She was never reported missing, you see. No one knew her real identity, not even the authorities. When she was found, there was no one left to claim her. She's been here, forgotten, waiting for someone to come for her. John felt a lump form in his throat, the truth crashing down like a tidal wave. His mother, the woman who had once held him, loved him, was now a broken shell of herself, lost in a world she could no longer understand. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't know if he could cry. He was numb, unsure of what to do next. All he had ever wanted was to find her, to bring her home. But what home could she return to now? What had been done to her in all those years of isolation? As the nurse left them alone, John sat beside the woman, his mother, who had been lost to him for so long. He reached out gently, unsure if she would even recognize his touch, but hoping, praying that something inside her might stir. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. There would be no simple answers, no easy way to fix the years that had been stolen from them. But in that moment, as John sat quietly by her side, he made a promise to himself. He would not abandon her again. This time, he would be the one who stayed. As John sat by his mother's bedside, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth, a storm of emotions raged inside him. He had come here hoping to find answers, to reconnect with the woman he had lost all those years ago. But what he had uncovered instead was a truth far darker than he could have ever imagined. The more he learned about his mother's time in the psychiatric hospital, the more a haunting realization took root in his mind. His mother hadn't simply disappeared. She hadn't left him willingly, as he had always believed. No, it was much worse than that. It was his father, his own flesh and blood, the man he had always looked up to, the man he had revered for his strength and authority, who had made the decision to send her away. The truth came to light one afternoon when John sat down with a hospital administrator who had been involved in his mother's care. The administrator spoke with a quiet sadness, as if delivering a secret that had long been buried. He told John that it was his father who had insisted on her being admitted to the psychiatric facility all those years ago. His mother, Juana, had been labeled unstable, a casualty of the war, of the psychological scars that had torn her apart. But it wasn't just the horrors of war that had broken her. It was the relentless pressure of a man who saw only weakness, a man who could not and would not deal with the vulnerability that war had left behind. John's hands shook as the words sunk in. His father, the man who had taught him everything he knew about strength and survival, had made the decision to lock his mother away. He had cast her aside, labeling her as unstable, as if her pain, her suffering didn't matter. The same man who had stood by him during his own struggles had been the one to break her. As the pieces of the past fell into place, John's chest tightened with anger and disbelief. The man who had been his hero, the one whose approval he had sought all his life, had betrayed him. And worse, he had betrayed his mother in the most cruel and unforgivable way. John had grown up with the image of a powerful man, a man who stood tall and resolute, a man who was never afraid to face anything. But now, in the wake of the truth, he saw him for what he truly was. A man who could not face the vulnerabilities of those he claimed to love, a man who had buried his own family to protect his own pride. The weight of it all pressed down on John, suffocating him. The realization that his father had been responsible for his mother's suffering shattered everything he had ever believed. He had always thought his mother had been lost, a casualty of fate, a victim of a world that had torn her apart. But now he knew the truth, that it was his father's actions that had condemned her to live in silence, to endure years of isolation, all because he could not bear the thought of his wife's pain. John's mind raced with questions. How could his father have done this? How could he have looked his own wife in the eye and made the decision to lock her away? The pain of betrayal felt like a cold, hard weight on his chest, and John could hardly breathe. But beneath the anger, something else began to stir, a need for justice. His mother had suffered for too long, and now, with the truth finally in his hands, John could no longer stand by and do nothing. The man who had caused her suffering, who had torn their family apart, had to answer for his actions. John didn't know where to begin, but he knew he couldn't let his mother's pain go unanswered. He had to seek justice, not just for her, but for himself as well. For all the years he had lived in the dark, wondering what had happened to her, for all the nights he had spent alone, wondering why she had disappeared. The truth had come to him like a hammer, shattering his world into pieces. But now it was up to him to rebuild, to seek out the justice that had been denied to his mother for so long. As he looked at the woman who had once been his mother, her face now worn with the years of suffering, John felt a deep, burning resolve. He had spent so long searching for answers, for a reason why the past had unfolded the way it had. And now that he had the truth, he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't let the man who had done this to her go unpunished. His father had stolen so much from them, but John would make sure he would not steal anymore. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, burning determination. John couldn't let the truth rest. The more he thought about what he had learned, the more his anger grew. His mind replayed the conversation with the hospital administrator over and over, the weight of the words lingering like a dark cloud in the back of his mind. His father, the man he had spent his entire life admiring, the man who had shaped him into the person he was, had been the one to destroy his family. He had been the one to tear his mother away from him, condemning her to years of isolation without cause, without compassion. John knew he had to take action. The pain of betrayal was still raw, but now it was joined by something far stronger: rage. It wasn't just about what his father had done to his mother. It was about everything he had been led to believe, everything he had been taught to value. He had thought his father was a man of honor, a man who stood for justice, but in reality, he was a man who had chosen to break his family for the sake of his own pride and control. Determined to confront the truth, John began his search. It was a painstaking process, but he knew he couldn't stop now. He spent hours in the hospital's archives, sifting through old medical records and documents, hoping to find something that would prove his suspicions. As the hours passed, the weight of his mission grew heavier. Every paper he turned over felt like a step closer to uncovering the full extent of the betrayal. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, John found it. Hidden deep within a file, he discovered a set of documents that made his blood run cold. There, in black and white, was his father's signature, scrawled across a form that requested his mother's. Admission to the psychiatric hospital. No medical justification, no diagnosis. Just a note, written by his father, stating that his mother was unstable and needed to be placed in care. John's hands trembled as he read the words over and over again. The signatures were clear, and the dates matched perfectly with the time his mother had been taken away. His father had made the decision to lock her away, to rob her of her freedom, for reasons that had nothing to do with her well-being. There was no mention of her mental health, no reason given for why she had been kept in the facility for so long. It was as if her suffering had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience to the man who should have been her protector. The documents were damning, and John's heart ached with every passing second. The anger that had been simmering inside him now reached a boiling point. He had always respected his father, had looked up to him as a figure of strength and resolve, but now he saw him for what he truly was, a man who had manipulated and abandoned his own family, hiding behind the mask of authority and power. The truth was clear, and it was a truth that John could no longer ignore. As he stood in the hospital archives, holding the evidence in his hands, John felt a mixture of emotions: betrayal, grief, but most of all a need for justice. He couldn't let this go. His mother had suffered for too long, and the man responsible for her pain had to face the consequences. With the documents in his possession, John knew what he had to do. He couldn't let his father's actions remain hidden any longer. The world needed to know the truth about what had happened to his mother, and the man who had torn their family apart needed to answer for his actions. John's mind was set. He would take this case to court. He would expose the man who had destroyed his family, who had caused so much pain and suffering. He couldn't undo the years of silence and neglect his mother had endured, but he could make sure that no one else would have to suffer in the same way. He would fight for her, just as she had fought for him, and he would not rest until justice was served. The path ahead would be difficult. He knew that facing his father in a courtroom would be one of the hardest things he would ever do. But he was ready. He had to be. His mother's suffering had to mean something. And in that moment, as he looked at the documents in his hands, John knew that he was about to embark on a battle that would change everything. The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence as John stood, facing the man who had once been his hero. His heart raced, every beat echoing the years of pain, betrayal, and unanswered questions. This was the moment he had spent so long preparing for, the moment where the truth would be laid bare, and where the man responsible for so much suffering would have to face the consequences. John's father sat across from him, calm and composed, his face as stern and unyielding as it had always been. The same man who had once held him, guided him, taught him the ways of strength and discipline, now sat there as a stranger, a man who had broken his family in the most unimaginable way. John couldn't even look at him without feeling a burning rage rise in his chest. The judge called the proceedings to order, and the courtroom fell into a tense stillness. The air was thick with anticipation. John's father, once a towering figure in his life, now seemed so small in the face of the truth that John had uncovered. As the trial began, John's father was the first to speak. His voice was steady, measured, as if he were delivering a well-rehearsed speech. "I did what I had to do," he began, his eyes never leaving the judge. "I placed my wife in that facility to protect the family. She was unstable after the war. I couldn't allow her to jeopardize everything we had built." John's hands clenched into fists. His father's words felt like a slap across his face. He had always admired the man for his strength, his leadership, but now those qualities seemed hollow, empty. John could see the lack of remorse in his father's eyes, the same coldness that had haunted him throughout his life. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain his actions had caused. John's mind raced, the years of resentment and grief flooding him in a wave of emotion. His father's justification didn't make sense. The truth was right in front of him. His mother had been abandoned, locked away, all because his father could not bear to face her pain. And now, here he was, standing in a courtroom trying to make it seem like it was all for the greater good, for the protection of the family. But John couldn't listen to it anymore. The words, once so familiar, now felt foreign and empty. His father's reasoning was a shield, a lie he had convinced himself was the truth. The man who had once shaped him into who he was now seemed so distant, so cold, as if the war had stolen more than just the woman they had both loved. It had stolen his father's soul. John's emotions boiled over, the anger he had kept locked inside for so long finally breaking free. He stood up, his voice trembling with fury. "You didn't protect anyone," he shouted, the words tearing from his throat. You abandoned her. You abandoned me. You chose to lock her away, to pretend she wasn't even human anymore. She was your wife, and you betrayed her. You took her from me, and you took away any chance of healing. The room fell silent, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. John's father didn't flinch. He didn't show any sign of regret or shame. His gaze remained as cold and unyielding as ever. It was as if John's words had no power over him, as if nothing could touch him anymore. John's chest tightened, the reality of the situation settling in like a heavy weight. The man he had once loved, the man he had believed in, was gone. The war had taken more than just his mother. It had destroyed his father too. The man who had once been strong, proud, and unshakable was now a hollow shell, trapped in his own lies. John's heart ached as he realized the truth. The war hadn't just torn apart families. It had torn apart everything. It had broken his mother, yes, but it had also broken his father. The man sitting across from him wasn't just a betrayer, he was a victim too, a victim of the same horrors that had ravaged so many others. As the trial continued, John's emotions swirled in a chaotic mix of anger, sorrow, and a deep sense of loss. He had wanted justice. He had wanted to make his father pay for what he had done. But now, all he could feel was a profound sadness, a realization that some wounds could never be healed, no matter how hard you tried. The judge's gavel struck, and the proceedings moved forward. But for John, everything had changed. His father's face remained cold, but inside, John was lost in a sea of conflicting emotions. He had come here, seeking justice, but what he had found was something far more painful. The truth that the war had claimed not just the lives of soldiers, but also the hearts of those left behind. As the trial continued, the heavy air of the courtroom seemed a world away from the quiet room, where Juana, John's mother, was slowly beginning to reclaim what had been taken from her for so many years. The hospital, which had once been a prison for her, was now a place of healing, a place where day by day she was emerging from the shadows that had long consumed her. The long years of isolation, the silence of her mind and heart, were beginning to loosen their grip. Juana's recovery was slow, but it was real. She had spent 3 decades hidden away from the world, locked in a place where no one had seen her for who she truly was. But now, as the days passed, there was a glimmer of the woman John had once known, a glimmer that had been buried beneath years of neglect and pain. Her eyes, which had once been vacant and distant, now sparkled with life again. The woman who had once been a mother, a wife, a person full of dreams, was starting to come back to herself. John, though still filled with the fire of anger, felt a strange sense of relief wash over him as he watched her begin to heal. It wasn't just the idea of justice for the wrongs done to her that brought him comfort anymore. It was the sight of his mother, standing tall once more, finding pieces of herself that had been lost for so long. There were moments, small moments, when Juana's laughter would echo softly through the quiet room. It was the first time in years that John had heard her laugh without it being a sound filled with pain. And though the wounds of the past couldn't be erased with a single smile or a few kind words, John couldn't help but feel that in some way she was finally being reborn. For John, the process was bittersweet. His mother's recovery brought him a sense of peace, but it also reminded him of the years that had been stolen from them both. The pain of what had been lost, of the mother he had grown up without, of the years of loneliness he had endured, was still there, like a shadow he couldn't escape. But the more he saw her regaining her strength, the more he realized that his quest for justice was no longer just about righting a wrong. It was about healing, about rebuilding what had been broken, about finding a way forward despite the darkness of the past. As Juana slowly began to speak more, to share memories of times long past, John found himself listening in awe. She spoke of a time before the war, before everything had been shattered, of a life she had once dreamed of, and a family she had once hoped to raise. As she spoke, it was as though the pieces of her past were coming back to life, each memory a small step toward reclaiming the person she had once been. John would sit by her side, his hand resting gently on hers, as they talked about the days before everything had fallen apart. He realized with a bittersweet ache that his mother had never truly been lost. She had just been buried beneath the weight of a world that had abandoned her. And now, with time and care, she was beginning to rise from the ashes of that lost past. The more Juana recovered, the more John began to understand the true meaning of healing. It wasn't just about finding justice for the wrongs done to her. It was about giving her the chance to rediscover who she was, to reclaim the life that had been taken from her so unfairly. And in turn, it was about his own healing too. For all his anger, for all the years of pain, he realized that this journey was not just about confronting his father, but about confronting the pieces of himself that had been broken by the same hands that had broken his mother. The search for justice, which had begun with so much pain and fury, had now transformed into something far more profound. It had become a journey of healing, not just for Juana, but for John as, well, he had fought for her, for the truth, for the justice that had long been denied. But now, as he watched her slowly recover, he saw that the real victory was not in the courtroom, but in the quiet moments of her recovery. Moments where the woman he had lost, the woman he had once loved, was returning. John knew that the road ahead would be long. There was still much to be done, much to rebuild, and many scars to heal. But as he sat there beside his mother, watching her take slow, steady steps toward healing, he felt a quiet hope grow within him. What had started as a battle for justice had become a journey toward. As the gavel came down, signaling the end of the trial, John felt an overwhelming wave of emotions flood through him. There was relief, yes, the kind that comes from knowing that justice had been served, that the man who had caused so much pain had been held accountable for his actions. But beneath that relief, there was something else, a deep, gnawing emptiness. He had spent so many years fighting for this moment, seeking justice for his mother, hoping that somehow the punishment of his father would erase the years of suffering she had endured. But now that the moment had arrived, John realized that no punishment could ever undo what had been done to her. His father's conviction was a victory, but it felt hollow in the face of the decades of silence, the years his mother had spent locked away, unheard, forgotten. The truth had been exposed, the lies were shattered, and the man who had hidden behind his power and authority was now paying for his crimes. But the cost had been high. His mother's life had been stolen from her, not just by his father's actions, but by the cruel hands of time, the years of isolation that had robbed her of the woman she could have been. John sat in the quiet of his home, staring out the window, the weight of everything pressing on his shoulders. His thoughts were filled with the image of his mother, her face pale and weary, yet stronger than he had ever seen her. She was no longer the broken woman who had been locked away in a psychiatric hospital for so long. No, now she was something else, a survivor, a woman reclaiming the pieces of herself that had been lost. But no matter how much she healed, the scars of those lost years would never truly disappear. The memories of those years in the dark, of a life she had never chosen, would always be there, lingering beneath the surface. John knew that no amount of justice, no matter how satisfying, could erase that pain. His mother would carry those scars for the rest of her life. And yet, as he thought about her recovery, about the strength she was beginning to find, he understood something deeper. The real victory wasn't in his father's punishment. It wasn't in the courtroom or in the vindication of a long-held grudge. The true victory was in the freedom his mother had begun to experience, the freedom to live her life on her own terms, to rediscover who she was, and to find peace in a world that had once abandoned her. For the first time in decades, Juana was no longer a prisoner. Not of her past, not of the choices made for her, and not of the man who had locked her away. She was free, and that freedom, the ability to heal, to love, to laugh again, was the greatest gift John could have ever hoped for. He knew there was still much work to be done, still much healing to take place. His mother was not the same woman who had been torn apart by the cruelty of the past, but she was still learning, still adjusting, still finding her way in a world that had forgotten her. And John, though he had once been consumed by rage and the need for justice, now saw that his role had shifted. He was no longer just a son seeking revenge. He was now a son helping his mother rebuild, guiding her as she discovered the world that had moved on without her. As John sat with his mother in the quiet of their home, he felt a deep, profound sense of peace wash over him. The battle for justice was over, but the journey of healing had just begun. He no longer needed the satisfaction of seeing his father punished because the truth had already set them both free. In that moment, he realized that the real freedom came not from the courtroom, but from the courage to face the past and choose to move forward, together. For John, the victory wasn't in the condemnation of his father. It was in the strength and resilience of his mother, in the freedom she was finding after so many years of suffering. And that, he knew, was the only kind of victory that truly mattered. As the months passed, Juana's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. What had once seemed like an insurmountable mountain of pain and loss was now slowly being chipped away, piece by piece. The woman who had been locked away in a world of isolation and silence for so long was finding her way back to the world she had once known. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were days when the weight of the past threatened to pull her under, but she was fighting step by step to rebuild her life. Juana began by reconnecting with the small things, the simple joys that had once brought her peace. She started attending community events, meeting new people, and slowly, tentatively, she began to engage with the world around her. The idea of being part of something again, of being seen and heard, was both terrifying and exhilarating for her. For so many years, she had been invisible, lost to the world, and now she was finding her place again. She started volunteering at the local shelter, helping others who had faced hardship, much like herself. And with each act of kindness, with each step toward living again, her spirit grew stronger. John, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. He had always believed in his mother's strength, even when she had been lost to him, even when she had been hidden away in the shadows of a life she never chose. Now he was seeing her come back to life before his eyes. It was as though a light had been switched on, and the darkness of those lost years was slowly being pushed back by the warmth of her newfound strength. But for John, the journey was just as personal. He had spent so many years focused on the injustice of his mother's suffering, the pain of her years of isolation. But as he watched her begin to rebuild, he realized something deeper. The true battle hadn't just been about seeking justice for what had been done to her. It had been about healing the wounds that had been left in their family. It was the silence of their suffering, the absence of understanding and communication that had caused the deepest scars. John had spent so much of his life chasing answers, trying to make sense of a past that had never fully made sense. But now, standing beside his mother, watching her rediscover the world, he saw that the real healing came from their shared strength, their shared journey. The true victory wasn't in the courtroom, wasn't in the punishment of the man who had caused so much pain. It was in the act of rebuilding, of creating something new from the ashes of their past. Together, they began to rebuild their lives, piece by piece. John was there every step of the way, supporting his mother as she found new ways to embrace the life that had once been stolen from her. He listened to her stories, the ones she had never shared before, and he watched as she began to find joy in the things that once seemed so impossible. Her laughter, though quieter now, was still a sound that filled their home with warmth, a reminder of the woman she was becoming. For both of them, the past would always be a part of their lives. It would never completely fade, never be erased, but it no longer defined them. What mattered now was the future they were building together, the bond they were recreating with each passing day. Their lives were not perfect, and the scars of their journey would always remain. But they had learned something important. Strength wasn't just about surviving the horrors of the past. It was about finding the courage to live again, to love again, and to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult the path. As they sat together one evening, watching the sun set on the horizon, John realized that the real power of their journey lay not in the battles they had fought, but in the love they had rediscovered. It wasn't the war that had destroyed them, it was the silence. But now they had found their voices again, and together they would continue to rebuild, to move forward with a new understanding of what it meant to live, to love, and to heal. As John and Juana walked side by side through the park, the soft rustle of leaves and the golden light of the setting sun surround them. It's as if the world itself is holding its breath, offering them a moment of peace that they've both longed for. The weight of years filled with loss, silence and pain still lingers, but it no longer defines them. In this quiet moment, they understand that their journey isn't just about surviving what the world has thrown at them. It's about choosing to live, to forgive, and to rebuild. They've faced the horrors of war, the cruelties of betrayal, and the long shadows of memory, but now, with each step they take, they are finally reclaiming their lives. John looks at his mother with gratitude in his eyes, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Now we can begin again together. Juana, with a gentle tear rolling down her cheek, meets his gaze and responds, "Yes, my son. War took so much from us, but it never took our love." This is the moment they've both waited for, the moment when the past no longer dictates their future. They've found something much more powerful than the scars of war, the strength to heal, the courage to forgive, and the bond of family that even after all these years has never broken. But as they walk forward, one question remains. How many other stories like theirs are out there, hidden in the shadows of history, waiting to be remembered? Stories of soldiers, of veterans who faced unimaginable challenges, and of families torn apart by conflict, but bound by something that refuses to be broken: love, sacrifice, and the hope for a better tomorrow. Did you already know a story like this? Have you ever wondered about the men and women whose lives were shaped by war, but who, like John and Juana, found the strength to overcome their past and create a new future? What would you have done in John's place, facing the truth of betrayal, but still holding on to hope for reconciliation? These stories deserve to be heard, not just to honor those who lived them, but to remind us all of the deep human cost of conflict and the power of resilience. The memory of those who have fought, sacrificed, and lived through the most challenging circumstances is a legacy that should never be forgotten. It's not just about history. It's about the lives we live today, the choices we make, and the impact of those who came before us. The legacy of soldiers is not just in the battles they fought, but in the lives they shaped, in the families they left behind, in the heroes who rose, not in the battlefield, but in the quiet moments of healing and forgiveness, just like John and Juana. If this story moved you, don't let it fade away. Share it, remember it, and let it remind you of the strength within all of us to heal from the wounds of the past. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this one. Stories that remind us of what it truly means to be human, to endure, and to rise above. Next time we'll share another unforgettable story from the lives of those who lived through history's most difficult moments. Until then, remember, every soldier, every family, and every sacrifice has a story worth telling. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.